It's fine. We'll leave it like this. Okay. Right. So firstly, just to say, before we actually begin the Masechta and begin learning tonight, I will say this shir should be refuah shlema for Dayan Erentrei, Chanech ben Blimela. It's pardon? No, it hasn't. No, yeah, it wasn't true exactly. It should be refuah shlema. I think it's significant that Dayan Erentrei has been giving a shir in Basra for many years. So us beginning this Masechta tonight, same Masechta which he's been giving a shir on, should be as chus for his reform. It's Hashem very speedily. Yes. So when you start learning a Masechta, you start a shir in Gemara. I do think that we need to have an idea of what it is we're trying to achieve. I think that obviously we're learning together, absolutely. We hope that one day that we'll even be able to sit closer together, but for now we will sit as far apart as we are, or in a digital version. But I for one have felt that there has been a tremendous emphasis in recent years, which has been incredible, on learning Daf Yomi, which has been it's just an amazing thing. Daf Yomi, it's got people learning thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of learning, and all of the offsprings of Daf Yomi, whether it's Amud Yomi or Mishnah Yomi or Halacha Yomi, it all comes from the vision of Rav Meir Shapiro. But at the same time, he would probably have been the first person to say that there's always a need to learn a little bit slower, to remember and hone the skills that are involved in learning per se, understanding the flow and structure of the sugya of the Gemara, and just understanding and spending a bit of time without the pressure of having to finish a daf, because that's always the problem with the daf. You always got to finish the daf. Doesn't matter how, you've got to finish the daf. So we're not on that we're not on that schedule, which is important. That allows more time for questions. It allows time for chabura, learning together. At the same time, there's a balance. So we hope to cover ground in the sense that you don't want to be too slow. Otherwise, you'll never get anywhere. Especially if you start the longest from second shaf. But it's not, the focus is not to complete. I would say that if we can, we'll aim for around an omid, but it might be less. It just depends on how far, how quickly we go, and the type of sugya that it is. So that's very important. Please do stop and interrupt whenever for kashas and everything else. When it comes to the Masechta itself, I think the Hakdama of the Meiri is very useful here. The Meiri is a remarkable sefer, in so many ways brings together so many of the Rishonim. Because the Meiri explains that Bava Basra, firstly, he brings out the difference between Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra, the focus of each different one of these Masechtas. He points out that the three Masechtas all deal with Chosh and Mishpat, that are not particularly related, that are not related to Dinei Nefashos. It doesn't refer to anything that are capital offenses, but they deal with different areas. So he says Bava Kama, the first gate, as it's known, of Nezikin, deals with dinim and tvias and claims that come from that a person causes to someone else, or one's property causes to someone else. The second shar, the second gate as such, is talking about halachas that come through claims that a person makes against someone else, not because of damages, but because usually of monetary claims. That is the general focus of Bava Metzia, loans and things like that, rentals and that sort of stuff. And the third shar, the third gate, if you like, of the Nezikin, which is this Masechta, it deals with claims that come that a person may make on someone else, both either from land disputes, so neighborly disputes. That's what we'll begin with in the first parak, or because other issues that may arise between neighbors, or, for example, damages that can be caused that through the impact that a person's property has on someone else, in the sense that he calls it if you have the idea of chazaka, the fact that you've got an established precedent to be doing something, and that can have an impact even in terms of, I've got an established precedent to cause damage to your property, in the sense that there might be a negative influence or impact, but I've got a chazaka. That's how it's always been for a certain amount of time, and therefore I can potentially continue doing that. It also deals with sales and other issues, and finally to do with Yerushas and inheritance. So he divides the Masechta as a whole into 6 parts. He says the first part is b'inyan hashutfin aleze tzad kofen zeh lachloik or be'eze binyan aleze tzad hein kofen. It talks about the way and the method in which you can force someone else or compel someone else to do a certain thing, like, for example, the division of the land, etc., etc., either at the beginning or later on as well. And from that comes the halachas of the impact that you can have on someone else through, for example, we call hezek re'iyah. We'll see in the whole sugya of the Gemara, we'll talk about what that means. Damage through seeing stinks. Effectively the fact that you can see into someone else's property. And similarly, people who are in a courtyard, a chotzer together, what they can compare, how they can compel each other to act, and even in the whole city as well, the Bnei Ho'er as a whole. The second area that the Masechta covers talks about damages that come from one neighbor to another, either oneself or actions that one causes to someone else. Thirdly, we have chazaka in general. That's really the third perek, and that talks about, again, the established claims. You have familiar with the 3 years chazaka and everything else. That's perek cheskes abatim. The fourth area is about mechiras and sales, and that covers really 4 parakim that deal with the halachas of sale. And then you have the fifth area the Masechta covers to do with nachlas, inheritance. And finally, you have the halachas of shtaris, of documents. That covers you the whole way through, the whole way through the Masechta. Yeah, it's 6. 126. Yeah. It's rather, it takes a while. Now, the first parak, and this is where I do think, again, I do think it's important in terms of structure of understanding where we're going with this. So I'm going to read what Miri says about the first parak. He says, "A parak orisha numena omnom yesod hakavona boy levoy boy inyone hachelek orisha." So it's going to deal with the first chelek of what we've been discussing. The Rabbi Yosef al chamisha inyon. It's going to deal, basically, broadly speaking, the whole of the first parak is going to deal with 5 different topics, 5 distinct topics. Horisha, number 1, v'shutfin, partners or neighbors in kofin zeh lechilok im lav. If they can force one another to divide the property that they jointly own or not. If they are dividing, whether that's because they're allowed to compel or because they've agreed to, whatever, that will be discussed. In what way do they divide? Do they have to build something concrete? What is the division, the physical division between them made? And through that, he says, and that's where you get to this idea of, if you cause damage to someone else through the fact that you can see into their property, is that claimable in a court of law? That's the first area. Hasheni, the second area that this first parak deals with, if someone doesn't want to build, and someone else compels the person to build, right? So he doesn't want to divide up the property, and he builds it himself. So let's say you have no reason to compel someone else to build, but you did so. Can you then compel the other person to pay for what you've done? You've put that all in. Can I now go and charge you for doing so? Hashlishi, the third is when it's already been divided up and the mechitza then falls down. How can you force each other to rebuild it? Through that, we get to some areas of a claim where you have a chazaka, you claim that you have a chazaka without a claim, without a justification for your chazaka on the land or on the existence of a certain fact. And if he claims that he's already paid off what he was supposed to pay, in what way, in what respect have you believed, and what respect have you not believed? That's the third area. So far we've got the idea of whether you can force each other in the first place to divide up and with what type of materials. The second is where someone doesn't want to build, but you just do it. Can you then get the other guy to pay for what you've done? And thirdly, if it's already been divided up and then it falls down, what claims can you bring on the other person to pay up or to rebuild or whatever it is? The fourth, he says, the fourth area is, in what way can members of the courtyard, so people owning a joint space, in what respect can they force each other to participate in a certain endeavor, a certain joint thing that needs to take place? And through that we widen it beyond people who are sharing a chotzer, a courtyard, to those sharing a mavui, an alleyway, a street. You'll be familiar with that, those who are learning Eruvin. And it goes beyond that, even to people who live in the same city, how much they can compel each other. One of the reasons why Perek HaShutfin is, for those who remember, is so fascinating, is because although it starts, as so many Gemaras do, with a simple scenario, it's not simple at all, but it's a scenario between the two neighbors, right? We broaden it out into basically the kehillah as a whole, the community, people who are living in the same city. What rights do they have to compel others to participate in fundraising endeavors? All of that is in this parak. Absolutely fascinating parak, and there's a lot of halacha l'maisa in it as well. If we can touch on areas of halacha, practical halacha that come out of the Gemara, then of course, let's try to do so. So that is the thing. Chamishi, finally, the final topic that's dealt with in this parak, he says, is shir hakarka, shebashir zeh koven zeh zeh lachloik. The size of the land, right? The minimal size that you can force your property to be divided up. So you have to have a certain minimal size. Let's say, the courtyard has to give a certain area for each other, so that one of them can force the other one and say, right, I've had enough of you, I want to build a wall in the middle. But that can only be if there's enough usable space inside the chotzer for each of them. Fine. Okay. So that's the Meiri's introduction. I say the Meiri has this incredibly systematic approach to the Gemara in general. It's maybe one of the Rishonim that's not learned enough, because he's so incredibly clear and brings in so many of the other Rishonim as well. Any questions before we begin? Okay, good. Right. So let's begin the Mishnah. Try to understand the Pashup Pshat in the Mishnah and take it from there. Shutfin, which means you have two people who own jointly a courtyard, a shared space, a chotzer. So they want to build, who want to build or place a mechitza in the courtyard, in the chotzer. They build the wall in the middle of the courtyard. That's a very simple, seems like a very straightforward statement. You want to divide up, you want to make a mechitza, so build it in the middle. And the obvious question, which is what the Gemara will pick up on here and discuss, is, that seems an obvious statement. If you are in a partnership with someone and you both agree to do something, then there is ein ma ledaber, as they say, right? There's nothing to talk about, right? We're all in agreement here. What exactly is the problem that we need to clarify what the halacha is? Yeah. So, yes, exactly. To separate, exactly, right? But even as so often with these Gemaras, especially at the beginning of a new topic in Masech New Parak, every word is up for discussion. So we're going to have to clarify exactly even what the word mechitza means, right? Does the word mechitza mean a physical wall, or does the word mechitza refer to the actual division between the two of them? Okay, yeah. Oh, you got it there. Okay, so we're going to switch to a more impressive than the host. I don't know the host. Okay, there we go. Right, sorry, now we're back on a better device. Hold on. There you go. Okay, thank you. Right. Okay, so. Yeah, fantastic, good. Okay, so before we go on, I just want to see the first two Rashis, because they clarify exactly what we just said. Hashutfin, says Rashi, sheeshlen chotzer b'shutfus. They have a courtyard, a chotzer, that they jointly own in partnership. And the houses, the two of them, are open onto this shared space. Rashi adds a very, very important piece of practical knowledge and how
people lived in the time of Chazal, which you need to understand the whole thing. The chatzeros, the courtyards that the Chazal talk about, are always in front of the houses, hey, v'rov tashmishin b'chotzer. And the majority of their lives, of the usable things you have to do, basic household necessities or whatever, take place in the chotzer. That's what the chotzer is. It is in front of the house, and it's an area where you use for cooking. You do all sorts of other stuff in the chotzer. You know that from Eruvin as well. That is why the space is so critical. It's not just a garden; it's a place where basically it's almost like another room in your house. But this one is a shared area. So these two they want to divide up. What they do is they build the wall as a kosel be'emtza. This one gives from his part half of the thickness or the place of the thickness of the wall. Rashi says, and so the other one. So they both give half the space to the wall, right? The wall goes down the middle, and half is in his property, and half is in the other one. Fine, okay, good. So the Mishnah carries on. Places where the minhag is to build these walls using these different types of materials, then that's what they build. The Gemara is going to explain the difference between each of these different materials. The most important practical difference, this is Gemara Aleph, the most important practical distinction between what gevil is, what gozis is, what kafisin is in terms of the thickness of the wall. That's where it makes a major difference. So, for example, gevil is a width of 6 tefachim. That's a very thick wall, and it goes down. In terms of the wall gets thinner and thinner. The word gevil, for example, means stones that haven't been smoothed. You also find the same word gevil, which is used in reference to clough. Yeah, there's also a type of clough, which also is the same sort of thing, which hasn't been smoothed, I believe. So there you are. And gozis is where it's already been smoothed down, and that leaves you with a smaller width. It's only 5 tefachim. And etc. etc. We'll see the more, and that will discuss the details of these different types of materials. So whatever the minhag is, that's what they use to build the wall. Hakol kuminhag hamadina, says the Gemara. Everything goes according to the minhag hamadina. Whatever the minhag hamadina is, if the minhag is in that place to build walls using gevil, right, which is the thickest wall, so the wall will be 6 tefachim, and one of them says to the other one, you know what, I fancy a wall which is only a gozis, it's only 5 tefachim, I want to save some money here. Then he say to him, no, I'm afraid we're going to follow the minhag hamadina. Okay, shortly we'll see this whole idea of minhag hamadina. We'll see a Tosfos in a minute, where Tosfos brings out a fascinating general klal in minhagim from this Mishnah. So we'll hopefully get to that as well. In terms of, don't worry, I'm doing all Tosfos. We'll try and pick and choose around bits and pieces to try and pull together our better understanding of the Mishnah and the Gemara. Okay, so the Mishnah carries on. Gevil, when it comes to gevil, zenos and gimel tefachim, the zenos and gimel tefachim. So with gevil, each one gives 3 tefachim. Each one has to participate 3 tefachim because the width itself is 6. Similarly, begozis, zenos and tefachim umechza. If it's made of gozis, one gives 2.5 tefachim, the zenos and tefachim umechza, and one gives 2.5 tefachim. Bikfisin, with its kfisin, zenosin tefachim, one gives 2 tefachim, one gives the other, one gives 2, and the other one gives 2 tefachim. So again, they split each one. B'levenin, with its levenin, zenosin tefachim mechza, zenosin tefachim mechza, one gives 1.5 tefachim, and the other one gives 1.5 tefachim. And the obvious question is, if we're following anyway, right, the minhag hamadina, if Mishnah says hakol k'minhag hamadina, whatever the custom is, whatever the minhag is, so why on earth do we have to list all of these things? So Tosfos will talk about that. Okay, that's the division part. That's how you build a wall. Lefichach, says the Mishnah, therefore, im nofal hakosel, if the wall falls down, hamokem v'havonim shel shneim. Since Chazal required you to build this wall in this manner between you, so if the wall falls down after a certain length of time, so one of them can't come along and say, that wall, that was entirely in my part of the chotzer. It was on my land, right? And I provided the stone. Can't be. The proof is because that you would have followed the way you were supposed to build. That would be the assumption, and that means you're dividing between you. So you can't come along afterwards and claim that it was all yours or indeed on your land. Okay, so if it falls down, we assume that the place and the stones belong to both of them. Let's pause there and see Rashi. Gvil, Gozis, Kfisins, the last of the wide lines at the top. Hakol Mefarish B'Gemara. Everything's going to be explained in the Gemara. Hakol K'minag Amadina. Says Rashi, Minag Livnos B'Gvil. If the minhag is to build with Gvil, Ein Chaver Yachalom, Ein Chavetz on Gozis. Says Frank can't say all I want is Gozis. You can't do that. The minhag is Gvil. You have to follow the minhag. Zenos Gimel Tvachim Cholo. Sha'ove Kosel Gvil Vov Tvachim. The thickness of a Gvil wall is 6 Tvachim. V'Shel Gozis Chamisha. Gozis is 5 Tvachim. V'Shel Kfisim Dalad. Kfisim is 4. Shel Levanim Gimel, and Levanim is 3. Says Rashi, therefore, since at the beginning of the binyan, the Chachomim were mechayev to build the wall between the two of them. They both had to together participate in the building. If the wall falls down after many years, one of them can't say kol hakosel nivna b'chelki, right? He can't say all the wall was built entirely in my part, and I own the stones, even though he may have a stronger chazaka than the other one. Now this is very important. Okay, the scenario has to be where it fell in his part. The wall's going to fall one of the two directions, right? So it's going to fall into someone's land. So the only logical way that you could think that he would have a legitimate claim on the other guy, is if he has a chazaka, is if he has a logical reason to say, this is mine, this was my property, this was in my property, and therefore it stands to reason that it must be my wall, or it must have been built on my land, or whatever, right? And and he might have that in a scenario where the wall happens to fall into his land. So come along and say, it's mine. You can't do that because you have against that, the whole way through Bava Basra, we deal with claim and counterclaim, all the time, right? That's standard across the whole Masechta. There's a lot of Bava Metzia that as well. You always got to look at the claim and the counterclaim. So the claim here is, the wall is mine, sitting in my land. The counterclaim is, right, but you built the wall. Assumption is you built the wall according to the way the Chachomim told you to build the wall. If you did that, the wall is straight down the middle, and therefore it's half each. Okay?
So what the claim would be, the wall is yours.
It's his own. Why?
No, I'm saying if the wall falls into my hot cell,
yeah,
and I'm saying it's all mine, I'm going to have to pay for the whole reconstruction of it.
Yes. Yeah, you want this. It seems to be more interested in the stones here than the. Yeah, you're right. You'd have to play for the. Yeah, exactly. There's stones. The stones seem to have had the value. Here. Yeah, it's true. Nowadays we would look at it and say, "So you don't want? It's your wall. You fixed the wall, right?" Exactly. Yeah.
There were thousands of pounds, and people were getting steamed. So you had that situation where they built this wall.
Right.
If you're down, you want these things.
You want the stones. That's right. Yeah. The stones are significant. It is interesting. It is interesting that. Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you call them shutfin?
Yes. Why do you call them shutfin? That's a very, very good question. I think the shutfin element is basically the joint ownership of the chotzer. So they can be regular neighbors themselves, right? But they're called shutfin because the key point is that they own the courtyard and shutfus in partnership. And that's relevant because one of the things the Gemara is going to discuss is, are we talking about division in a situation where there is what's called a din chalukah? There's enough space for each of them, and therefore, you can compel someone else to divide up that space, or there isn't, in which case you have to both agree. So there's a partnership, a joint ownership in the chotzer, but it is very interesting that they're actually called hashutfin. They have this joint. They're joint in that sense, the joint ownership. Yeah.
It seems like it's joint ownership of the chotzer.
Exactly, joint ownership of the chotzer. But David's point is that they themselves may not be shut in any other respect, right? So you would not say, you could say hashchenim, the neighbors. They could also be because the first Tosis points out that this connects with the last parak in Metzia. From the last parak in Metzia is Habayis for Aliyah, which also deals with a shared ownership scenario. And there it also refers to them in the Gemara as shutfin. So there is a connection between them. So really, all of the abovas are one masechta, right? Yeah. It's one masechta. They're 30 parakim, one masechta. That's what they are. They're divided for convenience into three because it would be seriously unmanageable if not. But they are really one whole masechta. Okay, right. Any other questions? We're okay. Carry on. Yeah. The Chaim begino. So the Gemara carries on and says the same rules will apply in a garden. A place where the minhag is that you build to build a wall between them, where that is the minhag. That's what the Mishnah says. You can be mechayev him to do so. But in a valley, in a bikar, I love really valley is really a bikar is really literally means a valley, but it really means a field full of produce, right? For growing things. Which is a place where there is no minhag to build a wall. You cannot obligate the other one to do so. If he wants to, he builds the wall into his own property and builds, he sometimes puts the wall inside his own property, or Bona builds it there. And he makes some sort of sign on the outside of the wall to demonstrate that the wall is his. On this part of the Mishnah, I don't want to spend too long in the sense that, as often the case, by the time we get to it, we'll anyway have to go back over this part of the Mishnah. By the time we get to the Gemara that talks about it. But in a nutshell, what the Mishnah is describing seems to be, and the language itself is not clear, which is why Rashi says the Gemara is going to explain exactly what this means. But it seems to be that we are talking here about a place where there is no possibility of compelling the other person who has the shared ownership of the land here, that you're each using half, you're growing your tomatoes on and he's growing your cucumbers on or whatever. There's no expectation there'll be a wall down the middle. You can't compel him to do so. So if you want to do so, you want to build a wall because you want to divide up. You can, but you're going to have to build it in your property, right? On your land. And yeah, exactly. In your land, in this field, this is a field in this case. Yeah. But you have, and then what you need to do is demonstrate some way, something that protrudes from the wall. The Gemara will talk about what that is, that demonstrates that it's owned by you. And the outcome of that is, therefore, if the wall falls down, right, the place that the wall was on and the stones are yours, because you put a marker on it to show that it's yours. It presumably has to be something significant enough that you can still find it even when the wall has fallen down. However, if they build a wall with both of parties agreeing to do so, even if there's no ability to compel, but we're both happy to build this wall between us, then they build a wall in the middle, right down the middle. But then they have to build this little protruding thing that shows who owns the wall on both sides. You've got to do so, because at the end of the day, otherwise one of them is going to come along afterwards and say it's mine, because you see, you can't compel someone else to build a wall in this scenario. So I built the whole thing. So you make a sign on both sides to show that it's jointly owned. The obvious question you will have here is, just have no sign, right? If you do no sign, you'll have the same result. Yeah, meaning, think about it, right? If you have a wall, right? If you put a sign on one side, then a guy can come along and say, right, that sign shows on my side of the wall that I built this wall, because you don't compel someone else to build it. This is my wall, it was all my property. The Gemara, the Mishnah says, but if they jointly build it, put a chazis on both sides to show that it's jointly owned. If you put nothing on, then by default it would be nothing. It would be joint. Pardon? Yeah, the Gemara will talk about all these sort of things that can come off and that sort of thing. That's why we result in both of them. Yeah. Therefore, im nofal hakosel, if the wall falls down, hamokim v'avonim shoshneim. The place and the stones belong to both of them, because it is a shared wall. Let's just do the last Rashi's on this mission. Yeah.
What's the difference between a garden and a chatzer?
A garden and a chotzer. So the way the Mishnah seems to set it up is that it's identical. Yeah, it seems to be that it's the same rules, because the simple reading of the Mishnah, it's not entirely clear. It depends how you read that line. The Gemara, I think, will talk about it. That line of Chaim begina, right? It just simply says Chaim begina. There are two ways of reading that line. You can either read it, so too in a garden, which is a place that there is a minhag, that the minhag is to build walls down the middle. You can obligate someone else to do so in the ways as expressed previously in the Mishnah, which seemingly would make the garden the same as the chotzer, right? But you also could read that line, the Chaim begina, similarly a garden, if a garden is a place, if it is a type of garden where the minhag is, and it's an if, it's not saying that it always must be a place that's what you do, but it's dependent on there are some which you do, some which you don't, right? So the Gemara, I think we'll talk about the significance of the garden. If you look at that Rashi says v'chein begina, and that's what we're up to, I think, in Rashi, mechayven es shneihen livnos, you can obligate both of them to build b'mokum shenagu ligdar be'emtza, in a place where the minhag is to build a wall down the middle of a shared garden, right? Okay. But in a field where you're growing stuff, which is called a stei halovon, stei halovon is as opposed to stei ilon. Stei ilon is where you grow trees, and stei halovon is where you grow produce. That's the difference. Mokum shenagu v'chul, I think it's called stei halovon. I think talks about it somewhere else. I imagine because it looks like it's covered with white. I think, but there might be other reasons for that why it's called that. Mokum shenagu v'chul. I'm going to explain what it's talking about. The oisa chozis mibachutz mifarish. I'm going to explain what it means to make a chozis on the outside. That if in the case where they both build it, they build a chozes on either side to show that they've both constructed this wall. Fine. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's before we go onto the Gemara, I want to see the Tosfos here, Big Vil, right? Third Tosfos down. Yeah, Tosfos here talks about this whole idea of minhag hamadina. And comes up with there's a fascinating outcome from this Tosfos. You got that? Yeah, where it says Big Vil. Big Vil is gimel tfachim v'cholu. Big Vil vov tfachim. Now, which doesn't. The reason why the Mishnah doesn't say with Gvil you give, it is the size is 6 tfachim. Otherwise, you make a mistake and think it means 6 tfachim for each of them. So that's why it spells it out and says no, it's 3 tfachim this one, 3 tfachim that one. Everything is crystal clear. Tomas says, why do you have to tell me the size of a gevil wall, of a gozis wall? The Mishnah says, you do like the minhag of the Medina. You know, whatever the minhag is of the place, that's what you do. So whatever the minhag is, blindly follow the minhag. Says Tosfos, v'yesh shloimar de'im nagu yosem evolve big vil. If their minhag was to build a gevil wall that is wider than 6 tefachim, lo yasa, you don't do that. You do not follow that minhag. V'chein kulam, and similarly all of them, ela kashir hamafurish, only with the specified measurements. It's like having standardized, what was that? Exactly, builder's regs. It's standardized measurements. Don't mess around with the gevil. Gevil is 6 tefachim. Anyone who starts coming along and saying, I want a super gevil, forget it. If that's what it is. Gevil is 6 tefachim, finished. Okay. So that's why it has to spell out these measurements. Amir says Tosfos, however, let's say the minhag was to do less than 6. Yeah, sir, that's okay. I can do less than 6. Because as the Gemara is going to explain, that even if the minhag is to build a very, very flimsy wall, Hotz of a Dafna is like made of what is it, like plant fronds of branches and things like that, right? That's all it is. It's very, very flimsy wall. If that's the minhag, then that's the minhag. Thomas says the Gemara, says Tosfos, my boy be Gemara, hakol kaminag behamadina lasui mai. The Gemara is going to ask, what are we coming to include with the words hakol kaminag hamadina? Everything is like the minhag of the place. Mashani, and the Gemara answers, lasui asra dinihigi behotz of a dafna. The Gemara answers, well, it includes a place where they only have a very, very shvach wall. all they have is a wall made of branches or whatever, then that's also included, and that's okay. They can follow those regulations if that's what they do. So Tosfos' question, that's what the Gemara answers. Tosfos' question is, Leimalasi kamina kolama komas kamishanagu. This is a very, very important question, right? The Mishnah says, Hakol kamina gamadina. We've established the reason why we still need the specified measurements for the particular things listed in the Mishnah, because people might try and fiddle with them. Like you say, building regulations. No, these are fixed. Okay, fine, yeah? But the Gemara picks up on a Kol Kamina Gamadina and says, you know why it needs to say that? Because even if their minhag is to build a very, very shvach wall that's made out of branches or tree branches or whatever, you follow that minhag as well. So Tosfos says, why? Let's just say, why does the Gemara answer that? Just say, you follow whatever the minhag is. No, it doesn't matter what they use. Why say specifically these heights of a dafna, these branches or whatever, these fronds of plants? The near el Rabbeinu Tam. This is the key point. It seems to Rabbeinu Tam, the davka b'hoitza b'dafna. Only hoitza b'dafna. There's a minimal type of wall. Aval pochas mikan. If it's less than that, afilu nagu. Even if they do so, minhag hedjatu. It's an insignificant custom. It's a minhag, which is called a minhag of a hedger. The hedger is in here, although it's translated as an ordinary person. We know that in this context, a minhag hedger. A hedger means a simpleton, basically, right? In other words, says Rabbeinu Tam, listen to this. He says, he proves from here, there are minhagim that you don't rely on, even where it says everything is like the minhag HaMedina. In other words, Rabbeinu Tam learns from this whole thing that there is such a thing as not everything that goes for that is passed off as a minhag actually counts. Even when it explicitly says Hakol Kamina Kamadina, you follow the minhagim, there are minhagim that are not worth their salt, not because anyone's done anything wrong. They just call it minhag shtus. That's what we call it, minhag shtus. It's a minhag that has no basis, that has no significance. Obviously, this comes with a hazard warning, used with care. It doesn't mean we should cast aspersions. We're incredibly careful about minhagim. We don't cast aspersions against minhagim without significant grounds to do so. But if you think about the way, if you think about the trajectory here, the way Rabbeinu Tam has derived this from the Mishnah and the Gemara, the significance of the words Akol Kamina Kamadina, and the way the Gemara has pulled that apart and said, okay, that means something less than in the Mishnah, but not nothing. So you see that that minhagim have to also be justified. They have to sign. That's a very good question. What do you define as minhag HaMedina? Because in this context, you could argue it's just the town, the area, the country. These are not presumably building regulations that are specific to Jews, right? Logically. But it could be that the Gemara will come on to talk about that, and if not, then I'm sure it will be discussed. It's discussed somewhere else. Let me just. Pardon?
There's a boundary between two territories or two countries.
Yeah. So what you mean? They're each in one. You mean the border between Mexico and the United States? They're on each side of the border. Yeah. They need a thicker wall than that. There, that's for sure. Yeah. 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 So exactly. No. So this is the
You're saying that there's a minimum quality assurance on this. Even if the minhag is to build paper wall, there's a quality aspect of the mission is coming over to override on.
What he's saying more than that. He's saying that there is a minimum. I see what you mean. You're saying that it doesn't matter what the material is, but it has a certain quality. But no, it does. It even matters the material. There are certain materials which would not qualify as a wall. And if people come along and say, well, our minhag is to do X, Y, Z, then you can look at it objectively and say that's not a valid minhag. It might be that people come along and say, but this is our minhag. But if it's wrong, then it's not a valid minhag. That's why this is such an important thing, and why Rabbeinu Tam's application of it, if you think about the wider application of this, you can often have a scenario that happens in shul sometimes where people come along and say, that's our minhag. Well, what if the minhag goes against Shulchan Aruch? It's clearly, it can be wrong. That can happen. Hopefully not often. Elias, sorry.
In terms of the minhag HaMedina, is it the place or is it the people who are in that place?
So you have a shul that's been this Ashkenaz forever, and there's just now more Ashkenazi.
So you're saying, is it a place?
It's based on a place, or is it based on the people who are currently in that place?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a good question. It seems to be, if you look at it simply, it seems to be like the place rather than the people. If the people change, they should presumably have to follow that minhag. But I think it could depend on what type of thing you're talking about. I mean, what's the Medina? Is the Medina the area, the country, or the people? Yeah, it might depend on the circumstances. It might depend on the circumstances. You see, a minhag HaMedina, presumably minhagim can change. You can have a new, you can have a new regime in the town who's or whatever, who say we're not using Gvil anymore. We're using Gozis now.
Is this comparable to Tefillin Cholamoid?
You get me started on Tefillin Cholamoid. I can't.
It's nice to have a role. You're not going to question Mishpot, so you go there.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Rabbeinu Tam doesn't make, if you learn what the Tosfos says just the way it's written, there doesn't seem to be a distinction. He says there are minhagim, you don't rely on them, even when it says a kol minhag Medina. He doesn't say it's specifically limited to Choshen Mishpah, right? It doesn't say that, right? Now, I said you have to be careful with this. I'm not saying you make a wide application. But your question, John, about tefillin is a fascinating one, because many people say that nowadays, and I happen to notice this here as well, there is no clear minhag, because some people are doing this, some people are, some people aren't, whatever, right? But I have been beforehand in shuls where there has been 99% of people wearing tefillin, right? And one person not. And maybe I shouldn't have, but I went up and said, I really think you should be wearing tefillin. Because that's a classic example of los discoded. If you're the only one, it's clearly the minhag to wear tefillin. So then you start to argue, well, no, but the minhag of the whole place, of the whole of London, there are lots of minhagim. But does that really work? If there's one shul, especially if the shul is the only shul in a particular area, that's also, so this is where it gets very interesting. Minhagim are very complicated. Yeah. But anyway, there you go. Right. Any other questions on that? No? Okay. Good. So let us start the Gemara, and we'll see. We'll get through some of it today. So the Gemara says like this: Sovrua, we think, so starting off looking at the Mishnah, the assumption is my mechitza guda. What does mechitza mean? Mechitza means guda. Mechitza means a wall. That's what it means. In other words, shutfin who want to build a wall. Now you'll tell me, obviously it means a wall. So the Gemara will come on to define mechitza in a different way. It could be, you will define mechitza, hashutfin sharotzu la'asos. Mechitza doesn't mean the physical wall, it means they want to divide the courtyard. So it can mean the division or the thing you divide it with. That's the point. We're assuming now it means the physical division. Kedesanya, as the Brisa says, mechitza sakem shenifritza. If you have the wall of a vineyard that is broken through, omeloi gudar. So this is a case of a kerem, a vineyard, which is next to a field growing other types of crops or whatever, and the wall is broken through. Omeloi gudar. He can say to him, build up the you rebuild the wall. In other words, the person who is on one side of the wall, and the wall falls down, he can say to the owner of the vineyard, you need to rebuild the wall because I legitimately planted my crops right up to the boundary, which you're allowed to do if there's a wall between the vineyard and your crops. I did that legitimately. And now the wall's fallen down, your vines are going to grow into my space and make them forbidden because of Kilai Keren. Make also because of Kilai Keren, the forbidden mixtures in a vineyard. That's what you're going to do. So he says build the wall. If it falls down again, he can say to him again, rebuild the wall. Top of the next Amud, if he gives up and he doesn't build the wall, he ends up causing the Torah, the produce, to be literally, it means to become kodosh, but of course here it means in the sense of osod. The Torah says pentukdash. And he's obligated to pay whatever the resulting damages are caused by the vines making his crops also. Okay, let's just. Pardon?
If the vineyard the way inside.
Yeah, it could be that there's a difference, but either way, once the wall is there, I don't know if it makes sense if it was there first, because once the wall is there, I'm allowed to plant crops right up to the wall. And now the wall has come down, your vines are damaging my crops. Yeah, pardon? It's a different question whether the specifics of how the wall was built or whatever. Maybe if the wall wasn't built properly, then he would have responsibility anyway to make sure it was. That's the terms of the quality of the wall we're not talking about here. Here we're simply using this brisa to explain and prove that the word mechitza can mean the physical structure, because that's what it clearly means in this brisa. It clearly means the physical structure. Let's see Rashi on this before we continue. Rashi says guda is a kosel, a wall. And Kedesani, as it says in the Brisa, to Kori Tana Guda Mechitza. Tana, we see that the Tana calls a Guda a Mechitza. Mechitza is called a Guda, a wall. Mechitza Sakerem, Shesamach Lestei Alovon Shachaver, that's next to the Stei Alovon of his friend. So you got the vineyard next to the field growing crops. Omelo Lebala Kerem, he says to the Bala Kerem, he says to the owner of the vineyard, Gudar Atzah, you need to build up your, rebuild the wall. Shleyasu Gefanecha as Tevuas Asada. So your vines don't make the produce of the field forbidden because of Kilayim. Because the owner of the field put his crops right next to the wall, as he's entitled to do. If there was a wall between them, this one puts close to the wall his trees, and this one puts his the crops that he's growing on the other side. When there's no wall there, it's number parak sheni. Then it says in the Mishnah in the second parak, a person is not allowed to plant a tree close to the field of his friend, unless he stays 4 amos away. Enough space to work the vine, to take around whatever you need to the animals or whatever it is to take to haul in the crops, to bahachi havi kilayim, because then it will be kilayim. Pardon? What was that? This is all about kilayim. We are simply bringing it to prove that the word mechitza can mean the physical wall.
What about the roots?
The what? The roots?
The roots of the tree.
Well, again, all of that will take us off in the direction of kilayim. Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah, about roots. And things like damages and cause of that as well. Yeah. What was that?
I was going to say, isn't this very long just social commentary in the sense
Meaning?
of not describing people, not using the word kotel as a wall.
Yeah.
Using mechitza, not using the word neighbor, using the word shut. In the sense of once you are getting to the point where you are discussing such things with the person next to you, you are not as neighborly as you were previously. You are now, entering into more of a commercial negotiation. You're not looking at each other in the right way. And the same way, mechitza is more of a division. You're planting.
Yeah, very interesting.
So
very interesting.
Choosing to use.
Very interesting. Right, very interesting. Yeah.
Indicate the underlying point that
that
you say you have a right to go all the way to your boundary. You do. But, but you should have some sort of knowledge of Kilayim and also an understanding not to do that.
Yes.
So it is your right.
Yes, that's right.
Once you're exerting your rights, you're no longer that status anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. No, you're saying the phrases that are used becomes a legal transaction. Yeah, that's right. Very interesting. Yeah, could well be. That's what. And that's why you lose your status of shchenim and you become. Yeah.
Also, that's a sort of fluffy, nice thing. But the negative side, not negative side, but the point is this is a legal discussion.
Yes.
Yeah. These Gemaras are about when we've got to the point where I'm saying
that's right.
You're saying why.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. 100%. Yeah. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's right. And that's why it becomes to this point. The only thing is, of course, that the problem arises because the Mishnah uses the word mechitza. Okay, and then does use the word kosel, right? The Shutfin who want to build a wall, they build the wall. That's the problem. The whole phrase is very problematic. If you say mechitza is a wall, right? We'll see. The Gemara is going to talk about this. Let's just finish off this Rashi. The next Rashi. If the wall falls down again, he can tell him once again to rebuild it. And again, the reason why he has to rebuild it is because he is then the mazik, right? The whole reason for distancing, Toras talks about this as well, because he is the one causing the damage. The reason for the distancing is because of what we call avodas hakerem, the space you need to work your vineyard. You're the owner of the vineyard. You have the responsibility. You have the responsibility. And there is a whole discussion here as well as to whether we say it's al hanizik laharchik asatzmai, is the person who's being damaged, is it his responsibility to distance himself, or is it responsibility of the mazik, the one causing damage? That's a whole thing for the second parak. It's not the main focus here. Again, we could spend a long time on the Keren, but the main purpose we want to hear for is simply to define what mechitza is. Kiddush.
I would assume that mechitza Keren means the wall that the Baal HaKeren built.
You see that it must be. That's why this is an absolute, because the only way of understanding this brisa, is it means the physical wall. Because he says to him, mechitza Keren, you never saw that broke down, that fell down, you tell him to rebuild it. It doesn't say who built. It doesn't say who built the wall. It doesn't say who built the wall. But in this sense,
why is it therefore the price of the Baal HaKeren to rebuild the wall? Let's say that the Baal HaKeren built the wall.
Yeah, because the main reason is because he is the one who is causing the damage. Yeah. In this situation, he is the one who causes the damage. I mean, Tosfos goes into this, right? In the last Tosfos on the page. In the middle of that Tosfos, the Re says, this is why it says the word Gudar, and it doesn't say Chayav Ligdar, he's obligated to build a wall, because you have to warn him, and if you don't warn him, he's not Chayav, right? So this is why it also talks about, that's why it also says it twice, yeah? Because there's a warning, right? It's in Nifrat Omer Gudar, even the second time when it falls down, you have to warn him again, right? He doesn't think you'll have to rebuild all the time. So there's a whole thing about how much you have to do, but either way, you see clearly that the onus of responsibility rests on the Baal HaKeren, because he is the one causing the damage to the other one. It's the vines that cause the problem.
It's interesting though, because when Rashi talks about the ability to compel him, Rashi doesn't say anything about damage. It says Mephisha Samach Baal HaSodek Zoro Samach Legeder. So in other words, the whole reason I can compel you to build that wall is because I'm relying on it.
Because he's saying because I legitimately relied on it. Yeah, because I legitimately relied on putting my crops there, because that's what I'm entitled to do, right? As soon as the wall falls down, your vines are now going to cause me a problem, right? Because this is why you need this idea. This is what if you look at the first line of Tosfos, that last Tosfos, Omer lo Gedar Pirush leBaal HaKeren, he can instruct the Baal HaKeren, Dehu hamazik. That's what Bach changes to. He is the mazik. Why? Because the whole reason they said you need to keep 4 amas away is because you need that space to service your vineyard, right? You've got to pull your oxen, whatever it is, that you need in order to gather in your grapes or whatever. It's for you. It's your space. And therefore, if the wall falls down, even though the reason why you don't have that space is because I put my crops there, but the fact that that space is necessary for you means that you are the one who is considered to be causing the damage for my crops, for my crops, and therefore I can compel you to do so. But again, we will. And Mr. We'll come back to this. The last time we're dealing with this idea of mazik and nizik in this context, right? So it will be something.
Assume that there is damage. The potential, I suppose, that if the wall does come down, it could be a benefit.
If the wall comes down, benefit in what way? Here, in this case, it wouldn't be a benefit. I mean,
Yeah, but is that if I get to Kiarabi, is that if you do it with intent, if it's accidental, is that okay?
No, you'll still have a problem with Kinaya Kerem, I believe. No, that's different. When it's already grown and you eat it, that's different. But you are not going to be allowed to continue growing your crops. I think so, yeah. Because that's at the top of the next Rashi on the next page, top of the next one. Kidesh Hatvua, Kidesh Hatvua, it will then literally sanctify, be Makadesh the Tvua, Em Hosef Mosayim, if it adds a 200th part of the 200th of the crops, continue growing in that situation, then it will make the crops osir. Lishna Dikranok Apen Tukdash, it's the lashon of the pasuk, lest it be sanctified, right? So that's what happens, and that's what happens if you leave it alone. It will become literally sanctified, and you'll be chayav b'achrayas. You'll be obligated in order. He is then obligated to pay for it. In other words, he can escape payment. The Baal HaKerem, the owner of the vineyard, can escape the responsibility to pay by simply rebuilding the wall. If he does his job, he's fine. But if he neglects to do so, then he will then be responsible for the damage that his vine causes to the other one. Okay, so just two more lines, just to kind of introduce the Gemara. The Talmud Rotzu, you see from the Mishnah, if we're learning the Mishnah that it means they want to build a wall, the only reason that it is they build the wall is because they want to do so. They have a desire to build a wall. Holo Rotzu, if they don't want to build a wall, that means to say you can't obligate, one of them cannot obligate the other one to construct a physical wall between them. If, let's say, one of them wants a wall and the other one doesn't, and says, well, I'm happy to mark out our spaces, but I'm happy to have one of these screens. A see-through screen will do for me, then that's okay. He can't obligate him to build a physical wall, right? There's no damage, but is there no damage? Alma, so you see, says the Gemara, hezek re'iyah lav shmei hezek. That damage which is caused by me overlooking, seeing into your property is not considered proper damage. It's not considered real damage. We'll just do one more Rashi, just to explain clearly what we've said, and then we'll go over it obviously next time. The Talmud Rotzu, livnos kosel. It's only because they want to build a wall. They want to build a wall. Midas Shnehen, they both agree. Hu dechayavim chachamim sheivnu bein Shnehen. Then Chazal kick in and say, right, you've decided you want to build a wall. We're telling you how to do it. You're going to do it by splitting it between you, making sure the space is split between you. That's how you're going to do it. Once you've agreed to build that wall, right? Fine. That's like in brackets. Later on, the Gemara is going to ask, so what if they want to build the wall? They can change their mind. Meaning, what's the difference? If we decide to do something, since it's all our decision, well, if we change our minds, what does it mean? The Shutvin who want to build a wall, Chacham say, right now you must build a wall. Well, if we change our minds, then we don't have to build a wall, since it was all us who made the decisions first place. Fine, leave that alone, leave that aside. If they both don't want to, in other words, one of them does, the other one doesn't, not they both don't want to, one wants to and one doesn't, that's lo rotzu shneim. One of them said, it's enough to split it with a masippas shelisedos eitzim tekuim ba'aretz nemuchim. Masippas is like a picket fence, you know, just the fencing where you can see through completely. Yeah, fine. Lo kaifin lo sticks in the ground. Lo kaifin on. We don't force him. The ein ze yochel lo maloi, and this one cannot say to him, Eini chofet shetira asokai. I don't want that you should see my business. I want some sort of permanent structure that is non-see-through so that I have privacy. And this is the key point that this whole sugya talks about, a fascinating and halachically massively relevant sugya about whether or not you have a claim of damages against someone else because you can see into my bedroom window or you can see into my chotzer. Remember, they did all their stuff in the chotzer. Lots of private stuff went on there. You can see what he's cooking for supper and whatever. So, Emet Hashem, what we'll do next time is begin this sugya, continue the sugya of what Hezekiah is, and hopefully also I'm trying to understand, you know, how you can have the concept of damages, right, where you haven't done anything. All you're doing is looking. How does that fit into the whole idea of what we know about causing damage to someone else? You know, you're not actually physically damaging. Fascinating sugya. Thank you all for joining. Okay. Yeah. It's good. Yeah, it's good. In future, in future from next week there'll be Mara at 8 o'clock. That's the plan.